The United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres is appalled by Israel's airstrikes on the Jabalia refugee camp in Gaza. The Palestinian Health Ministry says the attack yesterday killed dozens of people and injured more than 100 others. There have been reports of another airstrike on the refugee camp today. The UN leader's spokesperson told reporters that Antonio Guterres is appalled over the escalating violence in Gaza, including the killing of Palestinians, including women, children, and Israeli airstrikes in residential areas of the densely populated Jabalia refugee camp. For more analysis now, let's bring in live Regina Weiss. She spent nearly a decade prosecuting war crimes and crimes against humanity at The Hague's International Criminal Court. Regina, really appreciate you making the time for us. Thank you. As we've been reporting in the past 2 days, the IDF has targeted this refugee camp. Their stated aim is to kill Hamas leaders. The Israelis are claiming today they've been successful in that mission. A large but unknown number of civilians have also died in those attacks. What is your read on those attacks and how they would be treated by The Hague?
Thanks, Ashley, and good to see you again. Unfortunately, under circumstances where we have another humanitarian catastrophe unfolding before our very eyes, the attacks on that refugee camp are war crimes. Pure and simple, the principle of proportionality means you cannot use excessive force and excessive loss of civilian lives in order to gain your military objective. Now, whether or not a Hamas leader or several were in that refugee camp, I see the pictures being shown right now. That is not proportionate. That is a war crime.
Regina, just expand for us on that concept of a proportionate response. How hard is that to define? I mean, the concept of proportionality in war sounds like a very difficult one to grasp.
Look, it does. It's a concept that's been around for a very long time. And the unfortunate thing about war is there are legalities around war. Wars aren't per se illegal, but the collateral damage and the civilian life lost must not be disproportionate to that end gain of getting the military target. There's what we see here is without question an attack on the most vulnerable people. They are refugees. The attack on this centre goes just as far as attacking hospitals and protected areas, schools where children are. There is no question about proportionality here. And despite wars being legal, there are laws of war which have been around for a very long time. That's why we've had the Geneva Conventions, and that's why we have the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, which makes sure that these things don't happen. But unfortunately, as you can see, they do.
So, Regina, have war crimes, in your view, been committed on both sides here? When we go back to the beginning, the slaughter and kidnapping of Israelis on October 7, I assume the law is pretty black and white about the use of civilian hostages in war.
Of course, and I would never question that at all, Ashley. What I see, and again, from my living room, and I'm not on the ground, but from what I see is, war crimes of indiscriminate rocket attacks on villages in Israel, on civilians in Israel, the taking of hostages, murder of innocent civilians, absolutely war crimes. But in the same time, claiming that the end justifies the means by Israel perpetrating war crimes so indiscriminately as we see today, not just on the refugee camp, but the destruction of properties, the cutting off of essential services like electricity and water and networks, internet. These are all packaged up as horrific war crimes on both sides of the coin.
So what can the international community do now as we witness this happening in real time in terms of the investigation process? How quickly does that begin?
Well, it's funny you ask that, Ashley, actually, because there's been an investigation open into the war crimes being committed in the state of Palestine since 2021. And that's the International Criminal Court prosecutor. So Fatou Bensouda, before she left office, opened an investigation into the state of Palestine in March of 2021. Those investigations can go back all the way to 2014, which is the temporal that's what we call the temporal jurisdiction, so the scope of the time where the Office of the Prosecutor can investigate. So it's not new. But since 2021, nothing has happened. There's been no investigation in Palestine. There's been no arrest warrants issued. There's been a very small budget allocated to the Palestine investigation by the Office of the Prosecutor, about €1 million, which is quite dismal when considering in the last budget the prosecutor asked for 30 million more euro, mainly to go towards the Ukraine investigation. What we see here, Ashley, is a very selective justice. And one wonders whether if an investigation had started into Palestine, where war crimes had been committed again by Hamas and Israel on both sides prior to the awful conflict we see now, if an arrest warrant had been issued a year or two ago, would we be in this situation now?
Regina Weiss, fascinating to hear your insights. Really appreciate you joining us. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley.